All right, diving in today, folks, we're taking a deep dive into something truly special in the world of wine, Cannonau.
Yeah, Cannonau. It's not just any grape, right? This is an ancestral grape, really significant, especially when you look at Sardinia and some of those other Italian islands.
We've got a lot to cover today, a whole collection of sources to really give us a complete picture of this grape, its history, how unique it is, and just how important it is to Italian wine overall.
And it's really deeply woven into Italian viticulture, both historically and culturally. It's very rich.
So for our listener who wants to know everything but doesn't have all day,
Yeah.
we're going to try and pull out all the important pieces.
The key insights and see how they all come together.
So to kick us off, Cannonau, this grape, it might have arrived in Sardinia centuries ago.
Wow.
Possibly brought over by, get this, the Phoenicians or the Romans.
The Romans, really?
Yeah.
Pretty
I think it's
massive.
pretty far back. So where did it come from? We're going to try to figure that out. We're going to look at the terroir, what makes it special, the vine itself, how it's made into wine, the different styles.
The aromas, the flavors.
Yeah, all that. Food pairings, of course, and the regions, the producers, and what the future holds for Cannonau.
Sounds like a lot.
Big topic. You ready?
I'm ready. Let's jump into it.
Let's go. Okay, so the origin story. This is interesting because there's a lot of debate
Oh, yeah.
about where Cannonau actually came from. Our sources give us two main perspectives.
Okay, lay them on me.
So one theory, Cannonau was introduced to Sardinia, maybe by the Phoenicians, those seafarers, or maybe later by the Spanish.
Right.
And this links it to Grenache, or Garnacha, as they call it in Spain.
Garnacha, yeah.
And the time frame for this is thought to be maybe around the 14th century during the Crown of Aragon. So there's a Mediterranean connection there. Makes sense geographically.
Makes sense, yeah.
But the other view, this is what's really gained traction recently, is that Cannonau is actually native to Sardinia. It originated right there.
So it's autochthonous.
Exactly, autochthonous. And the evidence for this comes from recent archaeology and genetic studies,
Right.
suggesting it was there even before the Romans arrived, potentially.
Interesting. So it's either pre-Roman or from the Roman era.
It's a real wine mystery. And you can tell from the sources that people have strong opinions.
I bet.
It's not just a calm discussion. People really care about this history.
They're passionate about it.
So while that Mediterranean link makes sense, what evidence supports the native origin theory?
Well, recent genetic work has shown that Sardinian Cannonau, it's different genetically from Grenache clones you find at other places.
Really?
Yeah. So they're related, sure, but not exactly the same.
Okay.
Which suggests that Cannonau in Sardinia, it had its own evolution, maybe for a longer time.
So a separate path.
Exactly. And then you've got these archaeological digs. They've found grape seeds and old winemaking tools dating back way before the Aragonese were around.
Wow.
So centuries before, which tells you that winemaking was happening with a grape that looks a lot like Cannonau, way before we thought.
So the timeline gets pushed back.
It does.
Fascinating. And what's also really interesting is how Cannonau is part of Sardinian culture, really embedded.
Oh, absolutely.
One source even mentions it being part of their legends.
Legends.
Yeah, about Sardinians living long lives and Cannonau being part of their diet.
The longevity connection. Interesting.
It makes you think, right? Maybe there's something special about this grape.
More than just the alcohol, right?
Right. So whether it came from somewhere else or it's always been there, it's clearly deeply connected to Sardinia.
Totally. And it's adapted to the island's terroir over time.
And not just its presence, our sources actually trace how it's changed, how it's adapted to the Italian terroir over centuries.
Centuries, wow.
Yeah, there are ancient texts that talk about it. It's been part of the bigger winemaking picture for a long time.
It's really embedded.
And within Sardinia, it's adapted to the different conditions. You've got the coast and then you've got the mountains.
Two very different environments.
And that affects the wines.
Yeah.
So coastal wines, they get that Mediterranean influence, right?
Sea breeze.
Yeah, and often those soils are sandy or calcareous.
Okay.
And the wines, they tend to be more fruit-forward, lots of ripe red fruit, and a touch of spice.
Nice.
But the mountain regions, that's different. Higher up, granitic soils.
More structure, I imagine.
You got it. More structure, firmer tannins, and the aromas are more wild berries, herbs. Very Mediterranean.
I can almost smell it now.
And over all this time, winemaking has changed too, from simple methods to more sophisticated ones.
Always striving for quality.
Exactly. And stepping back for a moment, let's not forget about Cannonau's relationship with Grenache.
Right, right.
They're genetically similar, but how the grape actually shows itself, how it expresses that,
Yeah.
can be really different.
Depending on where it is, the terroir and how the wine's made.
Exactly. And Sardinia has really become the place where Cannonau shines, where it shows what it can do.
It's really found its home. Now, what's fascinating about Cannonau, it wasn't always seen as a premium wine, was it?
No, not really. Historically, it was more of a high-yield grape, something for local drinking.
Not so prestigious.
Right. Not really complex, often used in blends to give them body and
A
color.
workhorse grape.
Exactly. But that started to change. Our sources point to a shift that happened, led by some visionary producers in Sardinia.
When was this?
Late 20th, early 21st century.
It's pretty recent.
Yeah. They recognized that Cannonau had more to offer.
They saw the potential.
And it's really interesting because for a long time, Italian wine, internationally, it was all about certain regions, certain grapes.
Right.
But this rise of Cannonau, it's part of a bigger trend where people are discovering these local varieties, valuing their heritage.
Collaborating the need.
These producers, they didn't just change how they farm, they changed how people thought about Sardinian wine.
They created a new narrative.
Yeah, emphasizing its authenticity, its connection to the land. So what did they do differently?
Well, they focused on lowering yields, first of all, fewer grapes per vine, but higher quality.
Makes sense.
They became much more meticulous in the vineyards, really paying attention to the different terroirs. And they embraced new technologies, new techniques in winemaking.
So really a combination of respecting the land and pushing boundaries in the winery.
That's a good way to put it.
And it worked.
Oh, it did. It led to a much deeper appreciation of Sardinia's terroirs, how they shape the wine, and the result, wines with a much wider range of flavors, of aromas.
Really showcasing the possibilities.
Absolutely.
And it's always inspiring to know who these pioneers were. Our sources name some key producers:
Who are they?
Sella and Mosca Argiolas, Giuseppe Sedilessu, Cantina d'Orgali. They were crucial in showing what Cannonau could do.
Pushing the boundaries.
And they paved the way for the international recognition that Sardinian Cannonau has today.
It's a great success story.
It is. Okay, so we've talked about the origins, the history. Now let's get into the terroir. The vine itself, the grapes, all the details.
The nitty-gritty.
So when we say terroir, we're talking about where it's grown, right?
Right.
And Sardinia is the main place. But Cannonau, it's also known by other names like Grenache or Alicante.
Right, depending on the region.
And it's grown in Sicily, too, and in smaller amounts in other Italian regions, even in some other parts of the world.
So it spread its wings a bit.
It has. But the climate is so important, that classic Mediterranean climate.
Hot, dry summers, mild, wet winters.
Perfect for Cannonau. But then you've got the soil, too. Sardinia has granite, limestone, clay.
Variety is the spice of life.
Right. And Sicily has volcanic soils. So all these factors, they make a difference in how the grape expresses itself.
Absolutely. Terroir is everything.
So it's not just a general concept, it's really what makes Cannonau wines from different areas taste different.
It gives them their unique character.
So you can have Cannonau from different parts of Sardinia, like the Classico area or the coast,
Right.
or from Sicily, like Mount Etna or the south.
All different expressions.
And you can often taste those regional differences in the aromas, the flavors, the structure of the wine.
It's amazing how that works.
And then even within those bigger regions, you have these microclimates.
Ah, the microclimates.
Little pockets with their own little differences. Temperature, humidity, wind, sun.
It all adds up.
And they affect the grapes, so it's like a web of interconnected factors.
Fascinating.
Now let's talk about the Cannonau vine itself. What makes it special?
Okay, so the leaves, they're usually medium to large, and they can have 5 points, or sometimes 3, with little teeth on the edges.
Okay.
And the colors, they can be slightly different on the top and bottom of the leaf.
Interesting. What about the bunches of grapes?
The bunches are generally medium to large, and their shape. It can be conical or cylindrical. They tend to be pretty tight, the grapes packed close together.
Is that good or bad?
Well, it can be a challenge in Sardinia's climate because it makes them more prone to rot if there's not enough air circulation. But if you manage it well, it means the flavors and tannins get more concentrated.
So higher quality potential.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even the peduncle, that's the stem that holds the bunch.
Yeah.
It has its own special characteristics.
Really, the stem too.
Everything plays a role. Okay, so the berries themselves, they're small to medium, round, or slightly oval.
Okay.
The skin is not too thick, and when they're ripe, they're this deep, almost black-blue color.
Beautiful.
The pulp is juicy and sweet, and they usually have a decent amount of purina. That's the white powdery coating on the skin.
So it sounds like a pretty typical red grape in some ways, but with its own little quirks.
That's a good way to put it.
Now let's talk about its life cycle, how it grows throughout the year.
So Cannonau tends to bud fairly early in the season, which can be a problem if there's a late frost.
Oh.
And it ripens later, so it needs a lot of sun and heat to get fully ripe.
Oh.
Overall, it has a pretty long growing season, which is important for developing those high alcohol levels and that rich extract that Cannonau wines are known for.
So how do growers manage the vineyards to account for all of this?
Well, pruning is key. You can use different techniques like gaillot, where the canes are trained along wires, or cordon spirinato, where you leave short spurs on a permanent cordon.
Right.
But for better quality grapes, you want to prune them shorter, so there are fewer buds, fewer grapes.
Less is more.
Exactly. Then you have the training systems. There's the espalier, where the vines grow vertically, like on a wall.
Okay.
And then there's the traditional bush vine called albarello, where they grow low to the ground, almost like little trees.
I've seen pictures of those.
They protect the grapes from the strong sun in Sardinia.
Smart.
And both systems affect how much sun the grapes get, how much air circulates.
Interesting.
Then, of course, you have to deal with pests and diseases. Cannonau can be susceptible to things like mildew and oidium.
Those are the common ones.
Yeah, so more and more growers are using integrated pest management, more sustainable practices.
Being kinder to the environment.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And then there's specific techniques they use to make the grapes even better.
Like what?
Well, they'll remove some of the leaves strategically, so more sunlight gets to the grapes and the air can circulate better.
Okay.
And they might thin out the bunches too, removing some of them early on.
So again, less is more.
Exactly. It concentrates the flavors and sugars in the remaining grapes.
Mm.
Then there's soil management, adding organic matter, using cover crops.
Keeping the soil healthy.
Right. And irrigation is important, but you don't want to overdo it, especially in a dry climate like the Mediterranean. And then, of course, knowing exactly when to harvest is crucial.
Timing is everything.
It's about picking the grapes at their peak ripeness with the perfect balance of sugars, acids, and tannins.
So much to consider.
It is a lot. And you mentioned the different training systems, espalier and albarello.
Mm.
They both have their own challenges. Espalier.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to use machines with, which can be more efficient, save money on labor.
Right.
But you have to manage the canopy carefully so the grapes get enough sun.
I see it.
Albarello.
Mm.
Well, it naturally protects the grapes, but it's much harder to use machines, so it's more labor intensive.
Makes sense.
So, which system a grower chooses depends on the specific vineyard, the climate, and what style of wine they want to make.
It's all connected.
It really is.
Okay, so we've got the grapes growing. Now let's talk about winemaking. How those grapes get turned into wine.
All right, so the sources highlight something interesting here. There's a blend of tradition and modernity.
How so?
Well, you still see those traditional methods being used.
Mm-hmm.
Fermentation in open vats, using natural yeasts, long maceration times, aging in large neutral oak vessels.
The old ways.
But then they also use modern techniques. Stainless steel tanks with temperature control, specific yeasts, aging in smaller oak barrels like barriques, even micro-oxygenation, where they carefully introduce oxygen into the wine.
So it's about choosing the right tools for the job.
Exactly, using the best of both worlds.
And what kinds of wine can you make with Cannonau?
It's really versatile. You can get light, fresh reds.
Mm-hmm.
Those have shorter maceration, cooler fermentation.
Easy drinking.
Yeah, fruity, floral, with a nice acidity, soft tannins, good to drink young.
Okay.
Then you have the bigger reds, the ones meant for aging.
More serious.
Longer maceration, warmer fermentation, and they spend time in oak barrels.
That gives them structure.
Exactly. They're more complex, have firmer tannins, and they develop over time.
And then you've got dessert wines too.
You do. Made with late harvest grapes, or sometimes they dry the grapes first. That's a passamento.
To concentrate the sugars.
Right. Or they might stop the fermentation early by adding alcohol. That's called mutage.
So many options.
And we can't forget the rosés. Short skin contact for a bit of color,
Yeah.
then fermented cool to keep it fresh and fruity.
So something for everyone.
It really does cover the spectrum.
You mentioned maceration before, how important it is.
It's crucial for red wine making. It's how you get the color, the tannins, the aromas from the skins into the juice.
Okay.
How long you macerate and how you do it,
Right.
that affects the style of the wine.
So longer maceration means?
Deeper color, more tannins, a wine that can age.
Makes sense.
But there are other techniques too, like carbonic maceration.
What's that?
You ferment whole grapes uncrushed in a tank full of carbon dioxide.
Interesting.
Gives you a fruitier wine, softer tannins, meant to be drunk young.
Okay.
And then there's cold soaking, where you keep the crushed grapes cold before fermentation.
To extract more flavor?
Exactly. More aromas.
So much science involved.
It's a mix of science and art, really. And then you have oak aging.
That's important for those bigger wines, right?
Definitely. Oak does a few things. It allows a tiny bit of oxygen into the wine, slowly, which softens the tannins and helps stabilize the color.
Okay.
And oak itself gives the wine flavors like vanilla, spice, toast.
I love those flavors.
But the type of oak matters. French oak, American oak, how old the barrel is, how much it's been toasted.
So many variables.
It all affects the final wine. It's about finding the right balance so the oak complements the grape, the terroir, without being too overpowering.
A delicate dance.
It is. And guiding all of this, from the vineyard to the bottle, is the winemaker, the homologist.
It's the mastermind.
They make the decisions. They blend tradition and innovation. They understand the terroir. And ultimately, they're responsible for the quality of the wine.
They have to wear a lot of hats.
They do.
Yeah.
And many of them develop their own style, their own signature, how they interpret Cannonau.
So after all that, what do we actually get in the glass? What does Cannonau taste like?
Well, you often get this lovely array of aromas. Red fruits like cherry, raspberry, strawberry.
Sounds delicious.
And darker fruits too, like blackberry, plum.
Oh, okay.
And sometimes you get floral hints like violet or rose, and those herbal notes that are so typical of the Mediterranean.
Here.
Garlic, thyme, rosemary.
Very aromatic.
Depending on where it's from, you might even get a little saltiness, a minerality, especially from coastal areas.
Interesting.
Or more earthy, piney notes from the mountains. And spices too, like white pepper, cinnamon.
Complex.
It can be. And on the palate, the flavors often reflect those aromas. You get that red and black fruit and a touch of sweetness from the fruit, balanced by that nice acidity.
Okay.
The tannins are there, giving it structure, but they're not too harsh, especially when the wine is young. As it ages, the texture softens. It all becomes more integrated.
So how about the overall structure, the body of the wine?
Cannonau usually has medium to high alcohol, good acidity, and the tannins vary depending on the style and the age.
Makes sense.
And the body can range from light to full, depending on ripeness, yields, winemaking choices.
So many factors.
And as it ages, those initial fruit aromas start to change.
Evolve.
You might get dried fruits like raisins, figs,
Okay.
leathery notes, tobacco, cocoa,
Wow.
sweet spices like licorice, star anise.
Sounds delicious.
Even earthy notes like dried leaves, mushrooms, sometimes even a touch of balsamic or resin.
Fascinating.
And the flavors change too. The fruit becomes more like jam, maybe a bit liquor-like. The tannins get smoother, velvety. The acidity stays, providing balance. And the finish becomes longer, more complex, with those aged flavors lingering.
So the wine tells a story as it ages.
It does. It's a beautiful evolution.
And you mentioned how terroir and winemaking affect the flavors.
But they're crucial.
Could you remind us how they're connected?
Sure. Terroir, that combination of climate, soil, and land. It really sets the stage. It influences what aromas the grape develops, how much acidity and tannin it has naturally.
Okay.
So warmer climates usually mean riper fruit, higher alcohol. Cooler climates might mean more acidity, more herbal or mineral notes.
Makes sense.
And winemaking, well, that's where the human touch comes in. How long they macerate the grapes, whether they use oak. All these choices shape the final wine.
It's a partnership between nature and human skill.
Exactly.
So for someone trying Cannonau for the first time, any advice on how to enjoy it?
Absolutely. Think about the temperature. Younger, fruitier wines. They're nice, slightly chilled.
Okay.
Bigger, more complex wines. A bit warmer. Use a good wine glass, something with decent-sized bowl to let the aromas develop.
Right.
And depending on the wine, you might want to decant it, especially older wines, to let them breathe.
Good tip.
And when you taste it, focus on the balance. How do the fruit, the acidity, the tannins, the alcohol all work together?
Harmony.
And try different Cannonau from different parts of Sardinia. You'll see how the terroir shines through.
That's great advice. Now let's talk about food. What goes well with Cannonau?
This is a food-friendly wine. It works with so many things, both Italian and international.
Give us some examples.
Pasta with meaty sauces. A ragu, wild boar, sausage,
Yeah.
roasted or grilled meats, beef, lamb, porchetta,
All the good stuff.
and cheeses, especially cured cheeses. Pecorino Sardo, aged Parmesan.
Those are classic.
And of course, traditional Sardinian food. Malloratus pasta, porcidou, that's roasted suckling pig.
Okay.
Pain carousel, that crispy flatbread,
I've had that. It's delicious.
especially with local cheeses and cured meats.
Hmm.
And even grilled seafood can work well with lighter Cannonau.
Interesting. So it's really versatile.
It is. And beyond Italy, you can try it with Spanish tapas, Moroccan tagines,
Okay.
barbecue, burgers, Mexican food with tomato-based sauces, even some Indian dishes with spices.
So many possibilities.
And the style of Cannonau makes a difference too.
Mhm.
Younger, lighter wines. They go with lighter food.
Makes sense.
Medium-bodied wines are a good all-rounder. And the bigger aged wines, they need richer, more intense flavors.
Like a steak.
Exactly. Remember, the acidity in Cannonau cuts through fat, cleanses your palate,
I like that.
and the tannins go well with protein, like in meat.
So it all comes down to balance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you're pairing food and wine, think
Yeah.
about intensity. Match the wine to the food. Look for flavors that complement each other. For example, Cannonau sometimes has herbal notes, so it might go well with dishes that also have herbs.
Good point.
Use the acidity to balance richness, the tannins to complement protein, and don't be afraid to experiment.
Have fun with it.
It's a personal journey. And think about the occasion, too. A lighter Cannonau for a casual lunch, a bigger one for a special dinner.
Great advice. Now let's move on to the regions, the denominations, the producers.
The specifics.
So the main DOC for Cannonau is Cannonau di Sardinia,
Makes sense.
and it covers most of the island. And the rules say you have to have at least 85% Cannonau in the blend.
Okay.
But what's interesting is you can make different styles of wine under this DOC.
Like what?
You've got Rosso, which is red, Reserva, Classico Reserva, Rosato, which is rosé, Passito, which is sweet, and even Licoroso, a fortified wine.
Wow, that's a lot of variety.
And then within the main Cannonau di Sardegna DOC, you have specific subzones.
Okay, so even more specific.
Yeah, with their own rules. So you've got the Classico subzone, which is mainly in Nuoro and Ogliastra in the east central part of Sardinia.
Okay.
And the wines from there, they're known for being more concentrated, more intense.
More powerful.
Exactly. Then, if a wine says Reserva, it means it's been aged for at least 24 months, with at least 6 months in oak barrels.
So it's had time to develop.
And Classico Reserva, well, that combines both. It has
Yep.
to be from the Classico subzone and meet the aging requirements for Reserva.
The best of both worlds.
Then there are other specific areas like Nepenthe di Oliena, which is known for making elegant, aromatic wines with wild berry character.
Nice.
Capoferrato, which had those spicy Mediterranean-style wines, and Giurgiu, where the wines are often tannic and age well.
So much diversity within one DOC.
It's really impressive.
Hmm.
Are there any other DOCs where Cannonau is important?
Yeah, there are a few others in Sardinia, but Cannonau might not always be the main grape.
Okay.
So you have Carignano del Succis in the southwest, where they use Cannonau in blends, and Monica di Sardegna, and Mandrulisi, which is in central Sardinia.
I've heard of that one.
And then you have Ogolastra IGT, which is a bit more flexible in its rules.
So each of these denominations has its own set of rules.
Absolutely. They cover things like what other grapes you can use, the minimum alcohol level, how long you have to age the wine, how much you can harvest from the vineyard.
Lots of regulation.
It's all about ensuring quality and protecting the reputation of the region.
Now let's talk about some of the stars, the producers who are really making great Cannonau. Our sources mention a few key names.
Who are they?
Well, there's Sella and Mosca, a very well-respected estate. Their Cannonau di Sardegna Reserva is a classic.
Yeah.
Elegant, structured, red fruit, balsamic notes, long finish.
Sounds delicious. What would you pair it with?
Red meats, game, aged cheeses. The good stuff.
Nice.
Then there's Argiolis, another big name. Their Cannonau di Sardegna Costamolino is a great everyday wine. Young, vibrant, soft tannins, cherry, blackberry, nice floral notes.
Sounds very approachable.
And they also make a Reserva called Coram, which is a blend, more complex, black fruit, spice, oak, great with grilled meats.
Step up.
And there's Giuseppe Sedilesio, known for their Mamuthone, which is really powerful and expressive. Wild fruit, herbs, very Mediterranean.
Fantastic.
Cantina d'Orgali makes a beautiful Nepenthe di Oliena, very elegant and aromatic. Odaria has a great Reserva with ripe fruit, spice, and silky tannins. And Tenute Silvio Lai makes a Mandrolizai that's known for its structure and its black fruit, spice, and chocolate notes.
It's great to have some specific producers to look for.
It is, and then you have the producer associations. They play a big role in supporting Cannonau.
Oh, right, the organizations.
So you have the Consorzio di Tutela del Cannonau di Sardegna DOC. They're the main ones.
What do?
They protect and promote the denomination. They set the rules, do research, organize events, market the wine internationally, all to build its reputation.
Important work.
And then there are other smaller associations, regional and local, that work together on marketing, wine tourism, building the Sardinian wine identity.
It's a team effort.
They organize wine festivals, do promotions, even offer training for producers, support research projects.
Really comprehensive.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. History, terroir, winemaking, flavors, food pairing, regions, producers. What about the future? What's next for Cannonau?
That's the big question. There are challenges, of course. Climate change is a big one, like for all wine regions.
Right.
It can mean the grapes ripen too early, which can lead to higher alcohol, lower acidity, and affect the aromas.
Not good.
So water management is key, and they need to adapt, maybe use drought-resistant clones, change how they manage the vines.
To protect them.
Exactly. And pests and diseases are always a threat, so sustainable practices are really important.
To keep the vineyards healthy.
And of course, the wine world is competitive, so Cannonau has to stand out. It has to show what makes it special, focus on quality, and give people something unique.
You mentioned some specific challenges for Sardinia, too.
Yeah, Sardinia has to balance tradition and progress.
Oh.
They have these low-density vineyards, the Albarello system.
Which are part of their heritage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they also need to be productive to make enough wine.
It's a balancing act.
And they need to do a good job telling the world about Sardinian Cannonau, what makes it special.
Marketing is key.
It is. And sustainability is becoming more and more important.
For the environment.
Right. So in Sardinia, they're working to preserve old vines, traditional methods like dry farming, the Albarello system,
To keep those traditions alive.
and encourage organic and biodynamic farming. They also need to support these practices financially and maybe create gene banks to protect the diversity of Cannonau.
To safeguard its future. Expert speaker.